Good evening. I see some people are already on. Hello, Nancy. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, I'm here. Yay.
That's the important thing.
Yeah, we don't really start till 7, but this will give us a chance to talk and see if everything works. Some people are popping in already. We always have some, about 29 on already. That's great.
Oh, good. How many are you expecting, do you think?
You know, I didn't check, but around 250, between 250 and 500.
Great.
We'll see. We'll see. You know, yeah, you know, usually it's 250, but I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't check on that. I should have. Colleen.
However it works, it works.
By the way, Nancy Rubin Stewart, if I may present to you, Colleen Hogan, my assistant. Hi. And wonderful.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you as well.
Thank
And
you.
I have your pictures ready. So as you start talking about the different people, I will pull up the picture and share it on the screen.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's great. I wasn't sort of, but I thought you wanted to just like have people ask questions rather than me do a presentation.
That is correct. But as if you're answering a question about one of the, I can pull the picture up just to add a visual.
Great. That's good. Yes. That's great. Good.
Yes,
that
I'm going to be asking you questions. I'm going to be kind of interviewing you.
I understand.
About these two women who are interesting. But some people are chiming in. We'll see if they, just a reminder, hi, everybody. I'm Cindy Sweeney, our librarian general. And if you have any questions, of course, put them in the Q&A. Colleen always alerts me in case I've missed anything. She always keeps me on track. This is being recorded and it will be available on our DAR members only website.
Can you send me a link too?
Sure, I'd be glad to.
Thanks, I'd like to put it on my website.
Oh,
why not?
You're wonderful though, but yes, this is exciting. So I always kind of ask people if they want to put in any questions, go in the Q&A, but in the chat, if anybody wants to put what states they're from, and just let us know who's checking in. See if anybody responds to that. Oh, we've got Nebraska. Hi, California, Pennsylvania, my own state, and I even know that person. Colorado, Ohio, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Washington, Virginia, New Hampshire, Texas, Connecticut. I can't read them so fast, but you can tell we're all over the country. Sydney, Australia. Hello. She's from Maryland, but she's in Sydney right now.
Wow.
Isn't this great? This is a good way to reach across the nation and see where everybody is from. They'll be coming on till about 7 o'clock, and that's when we really start.
Terrific.
With the questions. And there's Lori from Pennsylvania, one of my friends, and Hunter from Virginia. She's I wish you could meet all these people. These people that
Me
I know
too.
They are fabulous people and great readers and knowledgeable. And Hunter really is a great historian. She's marvelous.
We love our readers, you know that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I'm so glad that you were willing to do this.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm delighted. I mean, anyone who's interested in all of this history, it's great. That's what we write for. We write for people to be excited about things, and maybe it helps a little with whatever's going on today, you know, somehow.
Yes.
I don't mean necessarily today, I mean in the present.
Right. Somebody's local book club just discussed your book a couple weeks ago. So they're really going to have some good questions, I hope. And they can, as I said, they can, where you're from. Brucey, where are you from? From what state are you, I should say. My mother would say from at the end of the sentence. Brucey, can you just tell me? Okay. Oh, in Virginia. Okay, good, yes. Okay, but we do have, this is our national book club. And a lot of people watch it from the website because they can't necessarily make tonight.
Right.
And then we have state book clubs.
Oh,
And then
yes.
we have, some chapters have them. As a matter of fact, I'm doing something tomorrow night with a chapter on one of our books. So yes, it's exciting. We're getting people to read. I don't know if I told you this, but we're preparing for America 250, which will be 2026.
Yes.
So that's why we started this organization, to
Oh, great.
get people reading. And I learned a lot, which we'll talk about. But what time is it? What's the time, Colleen? Oh, we've got about 6 more minutes before
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
some people get, yeah, some people get a little upset if I start before 7 and I wasn't there yet. What did I miss? So
We usually give, a minute or two afterwards, because people aren't always, the time doesn't, unless you're on the computer, the time isn't the same,
right, exactly.
yeah.
And as you can tell, we have someone from Australia, so we have people from all over the
Oh,
world.
yeah, that's brave. I can't imagine what time it is in Australia. Must be early in the morning or late at night or something.
We had someone, our last one. Oh, she says good. Oh, somebody from Alaska. Deb's here from Alaska.
Great. 11 a.m. Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh.
Some people, last time we had a meeting, somebody who lives in the States was in Paris. So because somebody said, oh, I can't join in because I'm a Unis overseas. She goes, hey, I was vacationing in Paris and I saw it anyway. So yeah.
Well, that's the advantage of being on, online rather than in person. I mean, there's either way, it's good, Washington State. So
yes.
Yeah. Either way, I mean, but it's great. One thing about Zoom is that we have been able to reach more people. Yeah. So it's
Right.
great.
And out Illinois.
Yeah.
That's another one of my Pennsylvania daughters.
Florida. I think we're
Yeah,
covering lots of states.
Utah. Yeah, Utah. New Jersey. Hi, Lucy. Yeah, they're coming in. But that's one thing that's nice, that is really nice about Zoom, is you can be with people from all over the world, all over the country,
Exactly.
keep them informed. We had to do that with our last 2 congresses. Because we couldn't meet in person in DC, so it was somebody from Hollywood. We had to do it online.
All right. When is your next Congress?
The last week of June.
Oh, okay. That'll be
July. Yeah, 4th of July, I will be celebrating. I'll be out of office. I will miss it, but it's been a lot. Especially we went to the Netherlands in October, and then Spain was a surprise, kind of, because the President General couldn't get to our Unis Overseas chapter, so we had a conference there. And then Hungary, Budapest, just was a surprise. Just
in time, got back.
I know. Yes, it's very interesting over there. So we've got 3 more minutes. Colorado. Everybody's chiming in. Our numbers are starting to rise. And I try to put out a reminder.
Mrs. Sweeney, we can mention that the link for the event at Congress will be live in about a month when the Congress schedule is released.
Okay.
And it'll be 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the 28th at the JW Marriott.
Okay. I have to remember that. You should remind me. No. Oh, getting too many things happening. I'm still jet lagged. I can't believe it. I've never had this happen. Going east is easy. Coming west has thrown me. Yates Mill chapter in North Carolina. Oh, we've got a question here.
I haven't seen anyone from Massachusetts yet.
Oh, they'll come. I'm concerned that perhaps the world news is taking people's attention.
Absolutely. That is true.
Oh, and there's Kathy Dixon. She's a state regent from Ohio. Hi, Kathy. Oh, let me see. Somebody just Michigan. go back and see who this. Um, okay, I'll have to turn that off so I'll keep this quit watching it. I'm gonna get, you know what I usually get after these? It's like, oh, Cindy, I forgot. If you knew how many emails I get about that.
Well, it'll be recorded so they can see it.
Yes, that's why they know they can.
Right.
They can do that. But it's good, and it's. I'm just afraid too many people are watching. Oh, Arizona's here, New Mexico, hi, Minnesota. I bet is it cold in Minnesota tonight, Carrie? Should ask her. California. Okay, well it's 6:59, so I'm just going to do a little. Everybody, I'm getting emails. Where's the link? Where's the link?
I'm trying to answer them as fast as I can.
There's always that.
There's always that. But anyway, for those of you who don't know, my name is Cindy Sweeney. I'm currently serving as Librarian General of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. We are gathered here tonight on Zoom for the DAR Library Book Club. We're getting ready for America 250 by learning a lot about those who participated in the American Revolution. Tonight we have with us Nancy Rubin Stewart, and she gave me a little biography that I put on the Facebook page, but then I did some research on my own and found that she's just published her 8th novel book. Your 8th one? Is this your 8th that you just published? Uh-oh, did she freeze? Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, I must have frozen. Okay, this is your 8th. You just published your 8th, but we'll talk about it later.
It says
And
the internet is unstable. I'm seeing that. So I don't know, you're on your end, I guess. I don't know.
okay,
Want
well,
you
I
to
live
know.
in the
Not-
east with a lot of wind, so let's
Oh.
keep our fingers crossed.
Okay.
This hasn't happened before. But anyway, and you're associated with the New York Times
I have been, yes.
and a TV writer producer.
Yes, I had been.
All these things, and you are director.
Mhm. Of the Cape Cod Writers Center.
Yes. Now, what's that all about?
It's a writer's center. It's where people come and learn how to write their books better and publicize them and promote them. It's pretty active. It's a year-round. Yes, we have a big conference usually in the summer, although the pandemic has changed that for the moment. So yeah, so I do that too.
Well, what led you to writing? You're so accomplished, but why writing? What led you to that?
Well, I think that if you don't write, life just goes by so quickly and things change so quickly, perhaps even more now today with the computer and social media. But if things aren't recorded and published, they disappear. And I think maybe, as far as women go, our history has been neglected or forgotten. Maybe Virginia Woolf said it best. She said, the women's history has gone down the drain with the dishwater. And I thought that was a pretty good, analysis. Women, of course, were taught to be silent, sexual, and solicitous of their men throughout history. And so I had been a reporter for a while, and several years, quite a few, and then wrote for many magazines. And it just seemed to me that women's history needs to be put on the record, otherwise it's forgotten and ignored. So that goes back a long ways, long before our current interest in women's history and our current interest in next month, starting tomorrow, Women's History Month. This goes way back for me. So I just felt that was really important. And so I began, with something fairly simple, looking at women today and wondering about women in suburbs. And that was my very first book a long time ago. And And that was a journalistic book about how women were changing in suburbs. They weren't just being volunteers, and fuel wasn't cheap anymore. And not everybody was married and coupled and had children and stayed home, and it was changing. And that brought me to look at the history of the suburbs. And that, of course, brought me to more women's history. So that's a long answer, but yes, I think it's important. And somebody else just recently said, writing is in a way a defiance of death, published work. Because, we're all here temporarily. But if important things have happened, and for women who up until rather recently, it hasn't been recorded, it's really important to get it recorded now.
You said history. Have you always been interested in history?
Well, I was an English lit major and a history minor, but yes, I've always been interested in history. Because I don't think we can understand the way things are today if we don't understand what happened before us.
So you said you're interested particularly in women's history. So that kind of leads us to Defiant Brides. Why these two women? Why these two women?
Well, I had written an earlier book on Mercy Otis Warren, whose name you may or may not know, but she was the first female historian of the American Revolution. She lived in Plymouth, and she'd written incendiary pamphlets and plays that were, put on kiosks and widely published in the years before the Revolution. So I had written that book, and that piqued my interest. There had to be other women, not too many, because most women at that point in colonial America, many could read, because of course they had to read the Bible, and some could write, but only in a peremptory fashion. Many of them could not compute, except enough to do maybe some household calculations. But she had been, by a fluke, her father was indulged her and let her sit in on tutoring sessions with her brother, who was going to Harvard. So she became very educated, and the revolution broke out and her family was involved, and she started to write about them. So long story short, I thought, well, there have to be some other women. History is usually written by the powerful and the victors. It is not written by the great unwashed, or people who haven't had a chance, or even people who did have a chance and did well, but didn't have the facility or the means to write. So she did. But I said, there've got to be some others besides Abigail Adams, and you can name two or three others maybe, that in this period, in 18th century history, notoriously has very few women writing in any detailed way. 19th century is a different matter. So I happened upon correspondence for each of these women. And what struck me, there was a lot of correspondence, which was very unusual. And also their lives were parallel. One was a well-to-do, affluent daughter of Tories in Boston. Her father was the provincial secretary of the colony of Massachusetts. The other one was the 17-year-old daughter of a very prominent judge in Pennsylvania, Judge Edward Shippen. So yes, there's the one in Pennsylvania during the Mashanza, which was a British celebration. There's the only picture we have of the first one in Boston, Lucy Flucker Knox. But anyway, so there they were, and it was striking because here they were. They both married people who were then patriots. I mean, he was Henry Knox. He was a bookbinder, and he became part of the Sons of Liberty. So she married him, defied her parents who were Tories, and married him. And Peggy, her father was not so keen on Arnold, even though Arnold was still then a military hero and commandant or peacekeeper, civil governor, if you will, of Philadelphia. But nevertheless, they both prevailed, and they both insisted on marrying these men. They were both about 18 when they married them. And then, so I found this correspondence from each of them, their parallel lives. And then I thought, well, one becomes a patriot, and then the other one turns out to be a spy. So how did this happen? And those were some of the questions that led me to begin researching even more and writing the book.
Well, you kind of jumped ahead there on something I was going to ask you later. So
Okay. Ask me
you
again.
do believe that Peggy was indeed a spy? Did she coerce him, or did he coerce her?
Well, I think we have to think about, the Shippen family spent the next century trying to defend Peggy. There are many articles in the Pennsylvania academic journals of Pennsylvania history and biography, and defending her, writing long essays, her descendants, or not her descendants, but her cousins and second cousins and later people, defending her and claiming, as they did at the time, this was a young, innocent girl of 17, 18, and she's married to a man who has a very high stature. He was a general at that point. He was wounded, but he was highly respected. What he did, especially in Valcour Island and then Saratoga, Freeman's Farm. So she was overwhelmed by him. She adored him, and the marriage, from what I can tell in the beginning, was very happy. So she was obviously swept into whatever he was ascribing to. I mean, okay, so there's one version of her, and it's been done in movies and novels and God knows what, of her as this sexual seducer whose father was really a Tory, and that she led him down the path during the honeymoon, and within a month he was already beginning to betray the Americans. That's one very common view. As I say, it's been popularized in many ways. And the other one is that she was this innocent thing that was simply swept away by this much older man who happened to be her husband, and that she remained loyal to him and did his bidding. So there are papers that the Supreme Executive Council will find later, when the betrayal, when he has finally defected, Arnold, and she's back in Philadelphia and in the arms of her parents. There are papers that they find that belie her innocent appearance and her innocent nature, and that she had really nasty things to say about people, and that she actually had helped pass papers. In any case, they voted that she had to be exiled. And it's a heartbreaking scene, which I describe in the book, of Judge Shippen taking her. She's maybe 19, or maybe not quite 20. Maybe she's just 20. Taking her and her infant son, his grandson, to the shores of the Hudson and delivering her onto a boat. And she goes over to Manhattan to what was then New York City, where Arnold and the British have occupied the island. So you're asking me what I think?
Yes. What do you think? What do you think?
I think she was swept into his discontent. And I think that as a young bride, she did what she felt she needed to do to support him. I think that would be only natural. Now, whether she was really a Tory, we don't even know if her father, Judge Shippen, whether he's a neutralist, a Tory, we don't know that. When the Patriots were in power in Philadelphia, he was all entertaining them and supporting them, and he had Washington for dinner and so on. When the British came in and took over the city in 1777 to 78 and turned it into a little London, he entertained them. And, the theory being that, he wanted to protect his judgeship, his position somehow. So was he maybe he was a neutralist, maybe he's just an opportunist. We still don't, historians still don't know. So, and we don't really know whether, and we don't even know if she was 18. I mean, she's very intelligent. When you read her papers, her letters later, you're this is a very intelligent, sophisticated woman. Of course, the family has burned all her papers till 1783. So we don't know anything about her before that. Even as a child, they just burned everything to prove her innocence, to protect her.
Wow. Then how did you do your research on her if those things were missing?
Well, it was at first, of course, I balked at, maybe I shouldn't be writing this book because maybe I can't. But there were enough, there was a lot of information about her from other sources. and relatives and friends and so on and so forth, and information about her father and family and her other sisters, one of whom was quite influential and with her. And so, as I say, after 1783, we suddenly hear her voice. Now, by then, of course, she's been married to Arnold, for a number of years. She marries him in 1779. This is now she's in England, and the voice starts coming after Yorktown. And they go to England. The voice starts coming through, and she is, she was Judge Shippen's favorite daughter, his most intellectually inclined daughter, and he taught her politics and finance for sure, and not just French and sewing and dance and the rudimentary education a Philadelphia belle would have. So she knew the score, and she was astute, and it's kind of surprising because the image we have before that is this innocent, truly innocent young woman.
So as you did your research on her, and you speak of her so very well, did you come to like her? Did you come to be critical of her? Did you pity her, admire her? How did you react to her?
Well, I certainly pitied her when I certainly pitied her situations. I mean, when Arnold is betrayed, well, he leaves Beverly Robinson's house where they are on the opposite side from West Point, and Washington has arrived, and then a letter has appeared that implicates John Andre and then implicates him. He's left, and he leaves Peggy with her baby in this house, and Washington's there, Lafayette's there, and Knox is there, and some other soldiers, but she's in a real pickle. And what she does, what does a woman do in the 18th century? She takes to her bed and she pretends she's insane from the shock of the whole thing. Well, she's not. She knew darn well, because she had participated in it, as was later proven. But that's what she does. So yeah, and then they hustle her off a few days later, still thinking she's gone insane from the shock. She's a very good actress, with her baby back in Arnold's carriage, and the carriage is booed and stoned and everything else on the way back. And a lot of places they won't give them food or overnight, but they finally get back to Philadelphia, and her family embraces her, and she's supposed to be a wreck when she gets back. But then these wagons start going by with the effigies of Arnold that they're burning, and there's a huge uproar about this traitor nationally, and in the army and in Philadelphia. And so you can imagine, if you can think this is a 20-year-old woman, what this must have felt like. Totally torn. She's still in love with Arnold at this point. And it must have been very painful. So I sympathize on that level with her. But then when she gets to England, well, in New York, but when she get in New York, they comment on she isn't quite, because she was a very charming, fashionable, well-spoken, flirtatious young woman, but she's rather subdued in New York. But when she goes to England, the king and the queen, both George and Charlotte, both recognize her. They give her pensions. She's given a great deal of attention. Arnold to a degree at that point, but not so much. I mean, the English, one thing about the English, they respect character. And there's a lot of doubt about this man's character, that he could be a traitor. Don't forget, Arnold also became a general in the army when he was still in the colonies and fought against the Patriots. I mean, it's pretty awful. But Peggy is still the darling. She's still charming. And she has a lot of friends and accolades. I love this comment by one person. I'm going to read this to you verbatim. It's, she was an amiable woman, and if her husband was dead, she would be much more noticed. So there was always that. So, and the poor thing, she then has to go with him on all his adventures. He can't ever quite secure a position that it lasts, because he often does things that are, very offensive. And he finally goes to St. John, Nova Scotia, and sets up businesses in there. And eventually, a few years later, he's almost driven out of the city because of all of his shenanigans. So You know, she does go back to Philadelphia once and see her parents while she is in North America. But then she goes back with him. And then it's terrible. There are more and more fiascos with him financially and investments that go bad. And meanwhile, she's investing with her father. She's writing back to him in Philadelphia, and she's investing in American money and bonds and God knows what. It's amazing. And, you know, Arnold eventually dies, 1801. And she has 6 children now, 5 children have survived. So her biggest goal is to make sure that they are financially secure enough to have proper English educations and be well placed. And she auctions the house. She auctions all the furniture. She lives in greatly reduced circumstances. She's also suffering from, by this time, cancer. And she pays off his debts. This is like almost her dying vow. And she dies just a few years later, in 1805.
Well, there's some questions have come up while you were talking.
Yes.
And they want to know, do you wonder if Major Andre, since she knew him before she knew General Arnold, if he influenced her and what that effect was?
There's a lot written about Andre. And again, we have some questions. The historians have come down on the part, yes, she has, you know, a locket of his hair and various sundry tokens of his affection, but he was a gallant, and all the dances and whatnot, he often accompanied her, but he had a serious girlfriend who was an acquaintance of a friend, actually, of Peggy's, Peggy Chew, another Peggy. So, by the time Arnold is involved in treason, he's still looking good to the Americans, and he's involved in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. He's commandant, and then he gives that up, but because of some of his unscrupulous work with ships and privateers and profits. But anyway, there are funny letters that pass between Andre and Peggy, and a lot of them are sort of coded words. I mean, they're about millinery and getting fabrics for hats and things, the British style, but some of it is we know is coded. There are a number of ways to code in those days, invisible ink, and peculiar phrases and letters and funny talk. So, you know, there are lots of different ways. So she was in touch with him, and yes, it was a way to, he became quite influential in Boston, in New York. And so it was a way to keep, to strengthen those bonds with Arnold. So, you know, again, there've been myths that they had this great romance and that she was really responsible because she cooperated with Arnold, that she was really responsible for Andre's death. That's, again, one common myth. Yes, she did help her husband, and inadvertently, well, her husband sort of bungled it with Andre, and Andre becomes victim to that later. But I don't, not at all intentional on Peggy's part. I'm sure that was another terrible blow to her, to see this young man who was very handsome, talented. People even on both sides, including the Patriot side, just worshipped him. He was extraordinary. So it's one more terrible thing she had to endure. But I think that, you know, I got to like her more and more, because not only was she brave and stalwart, I mean, she had character. Even it sounds kind of funny because she served her husband, but
why do you think the Queen of England was so taken with her and gave her an annuity income? I mean, can you explain that?
Yes, because, and they did some for Arnold too, because they were presumably going to help conquer the colonies, that they were going to win that war, and she was part of it, and they seemed to know she had been involved in that betrayal as well. Plus which, she was, again, very beautiful, charming, well-spoken, and really a pleasure to be with. So people liked her much more than Arnold. And the Queen took a special liking to her. The King did too, but especially Queen Charlotte.
One thing about her that impressed me, and I think I'm hearing that same impression from you, her after his death, she wanted to settle his debts
Mhm.
and take care of the children. I was very impressed by that.
Mhm. I was too. I mean, that's when my heart kind of went out to her. It was like, this person has, a lot of character, and she did not want. She, at the very least, obviously, his name had been dishonored in the United States, well, America, and then in some ways in Great Britain too. But she wanted to make sure that at least he wouldn't have left a lot of debts to people, that people, it would all be settled, and it was. Many of her children, they were mostly boys, actually ended up being officers in the military in England, and many of them settled in India. Was then a colony.
Yes. I was reading of the children, not many of them had descendants.
No,
And do you know if there are any living today? I just wondered if there were any.
I know. I spoke, one of my people, the many people that I spoke with as I was tracking through the histories and research, I did speak with somebody who, a professor who had known one of them, but he had passed away since. And he lived in England, and he was a descendant. So I don't know whether there are. I mean, there must be. She had, but they may. Many of them lived in India and places. I don't know. I know that. Well, he also had relatives. He had not with her, his previous marriage. He had relatives in Canada. They came to Canada with him when he began his businesses in St. John.
It would be interesting to see if they read your book, and because I think you brought her forward in a very positive, unbiased way. You told the truth, but she wasn't all evil. I mean,
She wasn't all evil.
You made her a
No,
real person, and I too came to like her. She took care of things. But what did you think of her husband, the General Arnold?
It's interesting because in the beginning, he, like everyone else, they worshipped him. He was incredibly brave. He prevailed at Valcour Island and removed an important, the British were going to come back to Ticonderoga and take that fort over, and who knows what, continue to push down what would now be New York State. And he was injured. He had been earlier at the Battle of Montreal, I think it was, and he had funded in each of these battles. This is before Saratoga. He had funded his regiments at his own expense, from Connecticut. He's from Connecticut, and so he did this at his own expense. He'd been an apothecary. He used to also trade in the West Indies, and so he did that. And he during one of the battles, I think it's Valcour. He was badly wounded in one leg, and after in Saratoga, the Battle of Saratoga, he was Freeman's Farm, and he rather than Gates, even though Gates got the credit, he was the one who really turned that tide, and all of the men knew it, and many testimonies to that. During that battle, his horse was shot out under him, and he was shot. And the horse fell on him, and that was the same leg that had been injured before, and only now it was so badly broken that he ended up in a hospital, military hospital upstate New York, in some kind of a wooden contraption, and they wanted to amputate because they're afraid of gangrene, and he refused. He did not want to lose his leg, so he was there suffering greatly, I'm sure, for 5 months. And when he finally was able to leave, one leg was shorter than the other by an inch. So he always wore a built-up shoe, but he walked with a limp. And for many months, a couple of years, he could not ride a horse. So, you felt, and the Congress had no money, and they weren't reimbursing him for his, he had used a lot of his fortune. So and then they started to appoint other people, major generals, before him. And that was the final blow for him, I think, that between that and the lack of recompense, the Congress had no money at that point. I think that was the final blow. This is a man who you didn't cross. He was charming, he was lovely, but don't cross General Arnold. And this was always known about him. And I have to tell you, Judge Shippen, when Peggy was begging to marry him, Judge Shippen was a smart cookie. He got in touch with some people he knew in Connecticut. He said, what can you tell me about this? Yes, he's a general, weren't in the same social classes as the Shippens. He was a middle-class apothecary. So that was one strike. But then he wanted to find out what this man was like. And he got some negative reports about his character, about some things that looked a little sleazy. Nevertheless, Peggy prevailed. So things already, he wasn't exactly the most straightforward person, let's put it that way. And what did I think about him at first? Of course, like everyone else, I admired him. He had been a hero. That was the big shock to the Patriots. This was somebody everybody looked up to and respected. And then when he turned coat, well, of course, I, like everyone else, really despised that. What can I say? And then you hear one event after another, one crazy story after another of things he did. I mean, once he got captured in Guadeloupe, this is long after they were married, he somehow got escaped in the most crazy way. I mean, then he became important to that island and helping them with things. I mean, he's incredible, brilliant man. But you know, he just didn't quite know how to negotiate with other people.
How would you rate their marriage?
Well, she was crazy about him in the beginning, and that looked like that went on for quite a while. But as things went in England, and then in St. John, things got more and more out of whack. She became more and more disillusioned. And in the beginning, she was writing about him when she could write to her father and her sister. He was the best of husbands. And then later on, she didn't say that. And then when a younger relative was getting married, she wrote back and she said, well, marriage is but a lottery.
Mm. Very interesting.
Yeah. So, she understood things weren't. On the other hand, she remained faithful to him and determined enough to preserve his name enough so that she would wipe out his debts,
So I would say, as you speak of her, you had respect for her.
Yes, more so as time went on, and more so as I learned more about her. Not so much in the beginning. She seems like a kind of frivolous and, not very serious and not really fully understanding the implications of what she was doing. But I think she did.
So she's a very attractive woman, very amiable with people, did well in society, married a dashing hero. Now let's talk about Lucy Knox. A little different.
Yes, well, Lucy was, she married this poor bookbinder in 1774. And her parents were absolutely horrified, they being high-placed Tories in Boston. And she went to live with this poor bookbinder who was very smart. His father had died when he was 12 and he was removed from Boston Latin School, but he was a great reader. And he eventually created a bookstore that was populated by, some of our well-known patriots, Paul Revere and Nathaniel Greene and John Adams. And it was a place where people congregated. And he was very well read. He read every book in that store. Of course, all of them were imported from England. And so he married her in June of 1774. And the relationships became more and more strained with them, the newlyweds, and her parents, because now 1774, tensions are very high in terms of the revolution. And when revolution broke out in April of 75, and bloodshed, that was the end of their relationship. And Lucy fled with him one night, it was said, on horseback, fled with him out of Boston. which was occupied by the British. There were British soldiers who were trying to get him to take over some high position because he knew a great deal about armaments. He had read every book, which he had in his bookstore, on British armaments. So he knew about all these things, and he was pretty clever. But Lucy, having come from an upper class family and having led an elite lifestyle, was absolutely flabbergasted that she was now in some kind of a safe house with many common women and living in pretty abject circumstances. And Henry's all involved in the beginning of the war. And he's ingratiated himself with Washington and impressed him with what he's doing. And this Lucy is there, and she hates it because not only is she away from her Henry, and by the way, this wonderful love letters that they have throughout their life, it's really touching. They're wonderful. I mean, he writes to her all the time. He calls her my Lucy, and he says she's always in his heart. He's always thinking about her. I mean, they're beautiful, beautiful love letters, and she does the same. But that creates a lot of drama as a result, because she wants to be with him every minute.
Before you go on, your research in these love letters, where were the love letters that you had access to them to read them?
They were at the Gilda Lerman research facility in New York City. So I was able to get, some of them were digitized, and I was able to get some of them there, many of them there. And then some of them, a few here and there have been printed. But that's where mostly they came from. And of course, all of this, let's see, I wrote that book, it was published in 2013. So some things were getting more and more digitized at that point, which was a great help. I mean, it would have taken a lifetime otherwise to read some of that handwriting, more than a lifetime to do that. I mean, many of the institutions that have major figures now have whole departments that are whatever the papers are, like the Franklin papers or the Edison papers, that take a very long time to transcribe from that kind of handwriting in those days. So I was fortunate about that.
And when Lucy was a reader, I understand, and he was a book seller, is that they met, and do you think they fell in love over books? And is that why they were so prolific? You don't think it was books that brought them?
I don't know. I mean, that was undoubtedly part of it. She was highly educated. He was too, although he was self-educated, essentially. I mean, that was part of it, but she was supposed to have, she was supposed to be dark-haired, a little rounded, but flashing dark eyes, high color, very attractive. And he was, believe it or not, I mean, you see the pictures of him, and later, he's corpulent and so on, the famous, all those pictures. But earlier pictures, he was supposed to be quite handsome. When she met him, he was riding through they were exercising. That's one of the earlier pictures of him. They were exercising, they're doing their exercises for the militia in the Boston Common. Of course, that's a much later picture of him, but there he was. So you begin to get an idea that he was good looking, and she was too. So, I think it was the usual romantic along with, and, she had a lot of spunk. She was feisty. I'd say she was, think about Rosie O'Donnell. I mean, I think this is the kind of person that comes to mind. Somebody like that. She just had a lot of spunk, and he liked that spirit. I mean, she defied her parents. She really never saw them again after the revolution, which is heartbreaking. But
you described her as having high color. Someone wanted to know, that was one of the questions. What is high color?
Dark hair, white skin, florid, cheeks, dark sparkling eyes. We all know people like that. So Colleen Hogan might even be described as somebody with high color. Yes.
High color. So they were attracted, they fell in love, they got married, and they went to conditions that were not quite up to her standards.
No.
Is that an understatement? Yeah.
How
did it go on? How did it go on? You read the letters. How did it go on between the two of them?
She was proud of him. She was frightened. She was very unhappy with her living situation. She was proud of him. And she was forever wanting him to spend more time with her, which he couldn't. And this struggle, this conflict goes on throughout up until really much later in life when he retires. This struggle goes on where he's saying, I want to be with you, Lucy. And she's saying, why aren't you with me? And why can't I come here? And he keeps saying, but my duty is to my country, because things were obviously very bad for the Patriots. So she ends up in this safe house in Watertown, and then that's no good. And then she and many other women were sort of hustled off to Western Massachusetts, even further away from the British soldiers and the occupancy. And then Henry is assigned by Washington. Oh, Henry wants to be, the head of the military, the equipment, and chief. And Washington says, "You're too young." He's 24 years of age, even though he knew a great deal. But Henry, before the battle in Dorchester Heights, Henry creates all of these barricades and all this incredible equipment to repel the British. And it's because of that, one of the major reasons, that finally the British are defeated in the Battle of Dorchester Heights. And eventually we have the evacuation. But even after that, by now, Washington has, okay, so he's going to be, he's going to be the head of the military equipment. So fine. So, and artillery. So that's fine. So now Washington says, now your next job is to go to Ticonderoga, and you've got to go fetch with some men, you've got to go fetch the equipment, all the guns, all the heavy cannons, the heavy guns, and so on. And Lucy's pregnant, quite pregnant actually. And she's in a panic, and she writes him all these incredible dramatic letters. And he says, don't worry, I'll be back in 3 weeks. And of course, 3 weeks ended up being 58 days, about what happened. And he comes back in January, I think it's late January 25th, I think it is. And he comes back with 43 cannons and 168 heavy guns. John Adams is standing nearby with Elbridge Gerry. They're both young and watching this parade as it comes down what was then Massachusetts Avenue in the western part of the state. Anyway, he comes back and he's safe, but those days she's overwhelmed and panicked. And soon afterwards, I think it's the following month, she delivers her first child, a little girl she names Lucy. But they are now favorites of the Washingtons. She's met Martha, who's been there at the beginning, and George, and of course, Henry Knox is now considered, chief of artillery and everything else in the war. And then they go south because the battle moves south after the British evacuate down to New York. And that's another whole drama. With Lucy, there's always a drama. And so she is very upset because Katie Green, Nathaniel Green's wife, and another officer's wife go down soon after the army goes down to New York, and she wants to be there. And he keeps saying, no, you can't come. It's not safe. We don't know what's going to happen. And nevertheless, she prevails, which Lucy always seemed to do. And she gets down there with her baby. And she's not there very long, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And the British offensive has begun. And at that point, at the alarm, Henry's one of the first to hear what's going on from intelligence. And he hustles her out of town. And she unceremoniously, and she is so angry. And from Connecticut, she writes him pretty angry letters. You don't love me. Why did you do this? You didn't even say goodbye. You just got me out of town. Poor Henry. And he's always pleading with her. She's funny. She writes at one point, and this is not a direct quote, but this is the essence of it. She writes, yes, you may be the commander or the important person in the army, but when you're home, we're equals. That's Lucy. So no nonsense. So eventually, then she's prevailing on him to get down. Of course, what happens in New York is not great with the British, but she wants to come down. He says, look, you can't come down. Smallpox is raging in the army. once you're inoculated and you're all right, then we'll think about it. But meanwhile, of course, the Army eventually, as you know, then goes on through New Jersey and eventually ends up in Valley Forge. And you know about Valley Forge, is very dire, famously dire winter, with many people dying of hunger and disease and not as much food. And the Army is in the doldrums and doesn't look like the course of it's going to go too well. Great Britain is occupied Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, things are pretty bad. But Lucy is still pounding on him. And Katie Green, who loves to flirt, and others have come to the Army. And why can't I go there? She has her child. Ultimately, in the spring, when Benedict Arnold, who knew her from Boston, because Lucy helped him arrange a date or a few with this woman he loved, and that didn't work out. But anyway, Arnold is summoned by Washington to go to Valley Forge. And Arnold is very, very crippled. He's not in any way recovered fully from what happened at Saratoga. And so he has to go in a carriage, and Lucy prevails on him. And I love this scene, and I wish we had records of it, that I can't imagine her going in this carriage for 4 or 5 or 6 days, whatever it took, weeks, 2 weeks. I don't know how many days it took, but a while. And with the baby in Arnold's case, probably 2 carriages. But anyway, he escorts her to Valley Forge, but it's May. And by May, General Steuben had, long since arrived and drilled the men. They had recruited many, many others. Food had come in on carriages, farmers' carts. The roads had been well cleared, and the army it was a whole new army. It was in great shape. So when the British finally evacuated Philadelphia, then they were ready to come in, and so on. So Lucy is finally reunited with Henry, and she is thrilled. And Nathaniel Green writes about how happy the two of them were. I don't think he was too happy about Katie, who really liked to be in the army camp so she could flirt with the other young officers. But anyway, that's another whole story. But she was with him for a while, and then she proceeded to follow him through the army camps of the Revolution. But disease was rampant, and at one point she gets hepatitis, and one of her children at Pluckerman, one of the army camps, where Henry really trained his men with artillery and created a whole separate wing, which was responsible for what happens in a positive way later with the Patriots. But Lucy loses that child. Ultimately, she bears 13 children. And but one after another in various times in their life die. And only 3 really survive to adulthood. It's kind of sad. But,
she must have been extremely strong. I mean, we know she was strong-willed, but an inner strength to endure the death of so many children. That was very sad to read.
It is sad, and some of them are awful, especially because some of these are teenagers or very young people. There's several times she births sons that she names after George Washington, and one after the other, for various reasons they die. One dies of an accident, other die of disease, and so on. So your heart goes out to Lucy many, many times. And Lucy is hailed by the soldiers. I mean, she continues, yes, it drives Henry crazy, but she dogs him throughout the entire. She even, he's in Yorktown in the trenches, and she's writing to him, "Why aren't you writing to me? What's going on?" He writes back to her, "I'm okay, I'll get back to you." It's crazy, but that's the way it was. But she also, by virtue of having her elite background and knowing decorum and proper ceremonies and so on, when there are celebrations, military victories, or when there's the French Alliance, 1778, there are celebrations in the army camps. And she, being the doyenne, let's say, of manners, she's the one who arranges them. And so people look up to her to do the proper thing and to arrange. So she becomes the hostess, if you will, of many, including, by the way, Washington later, his inauguration. But she's kind of self-important. At that point, she tries to get onto this, this raised couch where Washington is being, and there's no room for her. But so she's loved and admired, but also feared. She's sort of the formidable Mrs. Knox, because she has this other side, aside from the strength, she has this other side that's kind of commanding and domineering and formidable. And so there's a double portrait of her. And the other thing that comes apparent in the years after the revolution is she loves to be the hostess for these various teas and salons and whatnot. And she's an obsessive card player. And even much later, when she's in Maine, she's always inviting people to play. She always has to win, but she's obsessive about it. And there's curious theoretical comments about that. Was this because she was so unhappy? And this is a way to compensate. Obsessive compulsive disorder is what we might call it today. There's that side of her too. But you know, she's both hailed as this most patriotic, faithful wife, self-sacrificing wife, and on the other hand is this rather forbidding personality.
When you talk about these two defiant brides, both came from upper class families, both intelligent, capable, both ended up being widows. And they both had to manage a lot of things that you wouldn't think they would have had to monetarily.
Yes. Well, you know, Henry had been Secretary of War. Lucy had inherited part of the Waldo pattern, which were vast acreage in Maine. And Henry, through various and sundry manipulations, negotiations with the family, her family that's still been in. Anyway, he got most of the land, and they moved to Thomaston, Maine. And by the way, if you go up there, it's a great trip to go see the reconstruction of their mansion, which is fascinating to see. Yeah, I had the pleasure and honor of speaking there. It was great. It's lovely to see that place. It isn't on the exact same site, but close to where it would have been. Anyway, Henry in, I think it's 1806, might be 1805. He dies. He swallows a chicken bone, and he unfortunately it basically rips up his innards, and he eventually dies, probably of sepsis. Leaving her as a widow in her 50s, and she's heartbroken. And they used to host these enormous parties, 100 people at a time in their mansion. It's just unthinkable things, and very generous. And you know, Henry was never great with money and very generous. So for one reason or another, over the next, Lucy lives to be till. She lives to be 68 years of age, and that's in 1824 she dies. The house, basically, their income dwindles and has fallen apart, and they can't keep up with all the servants and all of that. And had long since stopped giving parties and whatnot. And so by the time she dies, you know, the house is sort of decaying and not being able to be kept up. A large house, mansion. And so she's had a hard time. Her daughter, one of her daughters, tries to hang on to that house, but eventually it falls into disrepair. And one of the daughters had married, had a number of children. Those are descendants today of the Knoxes. So I haven't had a lot of contact, tried again, but there are a number of them, and they're scattered. They're not anymore necessarily in Maine. And Arnold was never a good businessman, aside from all of his capers, his not so ethical exploits, and his attempts at securing proper, permanent financial well-being. And as I say, Peggy used to be involved with trading with her father, financial trading really, and investing on his advice. And so by the time Arnold invests in privateers that don't work out and so on towards the end of his life. So when he dies, he is in debt, big debt. And as I say, so it's Peggy who sells the house, sells all the furnishings, sells everything, auctions it off, and is able to cover his debts and provide for her children. So yes, they both, ironically, they both have a really difficult time after the death of their husbands. Well, it's not unusual then, because women had very little opportunity to do a lot in terms of finding, they couldn't own, widows could own property, but generally women had no experience with that.
Now that you've told us about both of these both very interesting women, did you prefer one over the other? You got to know them both so well.
Well, I sort of leave the question at the end of the book too, and I'd love to hear from people about that, what they might think, which one if they did prefer one over the other, because my view changed. I had empathy and sympathy for both of them. I did. There are moments in their lives that are touching for anybody, women or men who have read about them. But my view did alter somewhat later. So I'd love to hear, if we don't have much time left, but what people might think about which one they preferred more.
Some questions that people have, they want to know, Judith wants to know, did you read a novel written in a series from the American Girl magazine about Peggy and a young Quaker girl?
I didn't read that, but I do recall hearing something about that. Yes.
Okay. And someone else, I'm curious, let me see. I'm curious how one research for a book like this, you mentioned letters. Do you read everything and see where the story takes you?
Yes, I read everything and see where the story takes me. And, as you continue to write, you also continue to do some research, because when you come across these letters, then there are other things that lead to, it's a bit of a detective story for yourself as well. So you also gain more depth than you probably, at least for me, you ever start with. You learn a great deal as you go along, which is one of the great joys, by the way, of writing historical nonfiction.
Now here's a little one that's different. Do you think Benedict Arnold set up John Andre? There were a series of odd occurrences that led up to Andre being caught and arrested. Well,
he certainly was culpable in the careless way that he, don't forget, the original plan was that Andre was supposed to leave the Vulture, which was a ship in the middle of the Hudson, meet on the west side of the river. And they began to argue. They met late at night, and they began to argue about money. In the meanwhile, unknowns to Arnold or anyone else, one of his patriotic captains on the east side of the river started shooting at the Vulture. So the Vulture got kind of wrecked up and it took off. That left Andre stranded in the enemy territory. And all right, so Arnold and he went back to a safe house on the west side of the river, south of West Point. And the rules for anybody, if you were meeting in neutral territory, two different sides of the war, was you stayed in uniform. Only spies would be in other clothes. But that was not considered a good idea by who knows what. They put him into regular civilian clothes, not his uniform. Andre, now already we've done a violation of international law. And then the way he finally took him to a certain point, and then he assigned him to another person to take over, to take Andre across the Hudson and back over to the New York side and down to safe territory through neutral, to the neutral territory, still British patriotic owned, but then down to the neutral territory. And it's a little cavalier the way he does it, because he said he had to get back to wherever, to Peggy on the other side of the river. And so anyway, Andre does get caught just before hitting the neutral territory, and he has papers implicated that are in his boots that prove without a doubt he is involved in spy espionage, and he's not in uniform. And that's what resulted too many things. Even Washington, even the Patriots pleaded with Washington. He said, I don't want any part of it. This is international law. These are rules, and do what you need to do. So did he set him up? I would say he was extremely careless with him. I don't know if he didn't set him up to do all of that, but he was careless the way he did it. And the person who took him over was careless too. He didn't bring him down to the neutral lines. So left him at a certain point. They thought it was fine, and off he went.
It's unfortunate for Andre. Someone did put in the chat that they didn't like Peggy when they saw her on Turn, but after having read your book, she now likes her. So you did have an effect. You did.
Yeah, that was the surprise for me. And I'm glad it was the surprise for your reader.
Yes, she thought that. This has been delightful. You are amazing. I can't believe how much information you have. It just not at your fingertips. It's in your mind. You just know all this. It's wonderful. You have brought these two women to life. And I thank you for that. And I think you have an announcement for us about a new book.
Yes, I do.
If you would share some details about that, please.
Yes, I will. The book is called Poor Richard's Women. And of course, you know, Poor Richard's Almanac. So this book is about Benjamin Franklin's wife and the other women behind the founding father. And it's all about them. And this just got published. It'll be in the bookstores in about 10 days. I don't know if you can see the cover.
Yes, we can.
There it is. And yeah, so.
Somebody has already pre-ordered it.
Oh, good. Yes, they'll get it in a couple of weeks. Absolutely. So,
Okay.
you know, if you want to order it, great. If 12 of you get together and want to order it, you get a 40% discount. So my publisher's
Okay, I hope everybody heard that. If you get a group of 12 together, you get a 40% discount. That's pretty good. Now, so for those who still stayed on, we thank you for your time, by the way, but you might be willing to talk to us next month about Poor Richard's Women. So I hope people want to come on that. Let's see if anybody, are they still there? What do you think about that, people? Okay, people are already talking about the discount. Will you be excited? Yes, they want, yeah. They all, this just coming in. They do want to talk to you. So we will set up something. We'll be emailing back and forth to see if a day. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. I'm honored to speak to you all. And I love to speak to audiences like this who know history. It's just wonderful for me.
And there will be a gift coming to you. I don't know if you can see this. This is our DAR bowl. Wow. And we give it, it has Memorial Continental Hall and Constitution Hall on it. It's our special bowl. I will be mailing it to you. So when we email back and forth, I will need your address. I will make a donation in your honor, and you'll go on our donor wall. So your name will be there.
Thank you.
In Constitution Hall.
Oh, I'm really honored. I'm honored to speak to you anyway. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience.
Well, they so much fun. Everybody has enjoyed this. Oh, participants are raising their hand. I don't know what to do with that, Colleen. What do I do? They've raised their hands for questions, but there we go. Oh, they're applauding. They're applauding.
That's a waiver and applaud.
They're applauding you. They're applauding. So thank you. We will arrange for next month where we will learn about Poor Richard's Women. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.